Well, hey everybody! My name's Danae, and Lynn asked me if I would share about our son Galen's congenital heart story. So that's what we're going to be doing for the next few minutes, and I had hoped that I could have come in and just met you all and talked with you and had a more interactive dialogue, but with COVID, that wasn't going to happen. So we'll see how this goes. The only way I could figure to do it was to do like a YouTube video for the audio and then a PowerPoint. So I know you guys are probably so done with PowerPoints, but it's only 11 slides, so it'll be quick. And I don't know about you, but for content and for concepts, it's so nice to hear of a person who, like a real life person, right? Because some of the concepts are kind of nebulous, not so much with congenital heart defects, but it's nice to know of somebody, so you can kind of anchor the all the verbiage and everything. So let's see here. Just as a preface, I will say, though, that I've put some photos of us and our family in the slideshow, and if any of you have had experiences like these or experiences in the hospital or ICU, some of the images could be triggering, or if you've had kind of a traumatic emotional experience with someone in the hospital, this could be kind of triggering. So I just want to say that up front. But I hope that you will find it helpful, and I hope you can find someplace comfortable for the next few minutes and get a cup of tea or coffee or a nice relaxing beverage. And so let's get going. So congenital heart defects. This is Galen's story. Gaelen, a little bit about Gaelen. Gaelen is our third baby. We have 3 boys. And they're aged 11, 9, and 7. So Galen's 7. And 20 weeks into my pregnancy with Gaelen, at the 20-week ultrasound, we got the news and the diagnosis of that he had a left ventricular aneurysm. So if you'll go to slide 2 in the PowerPoint, it was pretty devastating news. So the top picture there is Gaelen in the hospital after he was born, before his heart transplant, because there's no scar. And then the bottom picture there is actually his heart, and the part of the heart to the top is his left ventricle, and they don't know what caused it, but his ventricle blew out almost like he had had a heart attack. And so he was not supposed to live. That was a pretty fatal diagnosis. And interesting fact is that he's the first baby and fetus to make it with this specific diagnosis in utero. So we got the diagnosis. He was not supposed to make it. It was pretty much a death sentence. But this congenital heart defect is just one of, under, a big umbrella of, under the umbrella of congenital heart defects. So there's hypoplastic left heart syndrome. There's many others, but one thing that they all have in common is that whatever it is, they're all managed. Each condition is managed heart failure. So some people, patients are able to be managed without transplant, and their hearts can tick along and are fine for a while, and some are not. And Galen's was one of the ones that his heart was not working. So that 20-week ultrasound was pretty devastating to our family, as you might expect, because he wasn't expected to live. And so we kind of were making plans for fetal demise. And as a mom, there aren't any words to kind of tell you unless you've experienced that, or lost a baby, that feeling, it's indescribable. And so, as a family, it took a very huge toll on us stress-wise, and it was pretty devastating. But weeks went by, and he was still around, and we had to go down to Seattle Children's, and they did ultrasounds towards term, and week by week he was still okay. And so they were like, well, I guess we'll prepare and see, in case he makes it. I mean, he won't, but just in case. And so we actually coordinated for me to live in Seattle with some family for 3 weeks before he was born. And so, you think of a family and how hard that is to kind of have mom gone, and then dad was working, and we were very, very lucky and blessed to have family support, my mom and Graham's folks, my husband's parents, to watch our kids, so that I could be down in Seattle. And I needed to be down in Seattle actually because Gaelen was put on the fetal heart transplant list, which is very, very uncommon. But what they did was put him on the list, even though he wasn't born yet. And essentially what would have happened is if a heart, the right heart had become available for him, he would have been C-sectioned, and then they would have done a heart transplant immediately after that, which sounds crazy. So long story short, a heart wasn't available between the time I was down in Seattle and the time he was born. But yeah, that would have been wild. So he was born, and then if you go to slide 3, there is a picture of the surgeons and the anesthesiologist, I think, wheeling him to the OR once we got the news that a heart had become available. And that was, as you might imagine, kind of a roller coaster of emotions, because we realized that because there was a heart available, another baby child did not make it, and that's why Gaelen got a second chance. And so Gaelen was 2 weeks old at the time we got an organ became available. And so and then after that he spent 2+ months in the cardiac ICU, and then about a month on the regular floor. So long stint in the hospital. And then again, our family was apart for that time. And so it was quite something. It was quite something. And I'm just looking at my notes here on the PowerPoint. Sorry, hang on there. So, and if you go to slide 4, there's a picture of him with all his monitors. And those CICU nurses, I tell you what, they are amazing. Just incredible at what they do. And if you go to slide 5, that's Gaelen after his transplant. And there were, so many lines and monitors, and you can see the machine was breathing for him, and he was on every medication that you can imagine. Not really, but it certainly seemed like it. And when he came home after that time in the hospital, he was on 18 different medications, oxygen and an NG tube, and you know, the medications were all around the clock, and so it was a lot again for the family, and we'll talk about kind of the nursing role in all of that. And but yeah, it was amazing. It was truly amazing, and I think back on that and kind of think, wow, I don't know how we did that, but we did. And so slide 6 shows a few pictures of our life now. So every year on the 23rd, actually, which is coming up, I don't know when you'll get to see this, but this week we'll be celebrating his heart day, which is kind of cool. So every year, a couple weeks after his birthday, he was born on the 9th of April, we celebrate his heart day when he got that second chance. So anyway, our life now is, you know, his life didn't stop at transplant, and we committed to a pretty intense journey for him. So transplant for Gaelen means that he's chronically immunosuppressed. So his immune system is compromised, and from medication, so that his body doesn't reject the organ. And that's twice a day for life. And he was on a lot of medications initially for months and years, and then they kind of all came off once he stabilized, and now it's just 2 medications twice a day. He gets frequent lab draws, which are no fun, to check his medication levels, and actually pretty frequent surgeries. So he has annual heart caths where they go in and take a tissue sample and check for rejection. And then a couple years ago, he had a G-tube surgery. He's always had issues with oral feeding and getting enough calories. So he had a G-tube surgery, and you can see that in the far right photo, his button, as it's called. And we have frequent appointments, at least every quarter, down at Seattle Children's to check on his heart, do an echocardiogram, and there's a picture in the middle there of him getting his echo. And it's a lot of time, it's a lot of energy. His life, especially in the early years, he would, you know, in the cold and flu season, we would be in the doctor's office every week because he had an infection, and once he cleared one up, he'd have another one, and just much higher than average antibiotic use for these kids who are chronically immunosuppressed and can't fight off, you know, an ear infection or a sinus infection or things like that. So you know, you can't, like our other kids, just let him fight it off, because he can't do that. So going to slide 7. With Gaelen, that's his birthday, this most recent birthday. He's a cheesin' in that photo. There's still many unknowns for Gaelen, and that's maybe the hardest part of the whole transplant journey, is that we don't have any of the answers, really. And what I want you to know is that for transplant, or any transplant really, it's not a fix. There's no fix. It's managing a disease and a condition. At least it can't be fixed now, because we're using donor hearts, which the body eventually finds a way to reject, even with medications. So, you know, questions like his next transplant, when will that be? What stage of life will he be in? You know, and how will that impact his that stage of life? And you know, and there's just no way to know. I mean, hearts can last a decade or 2, or even I think 3. I can't recall actually, I think, how long the longest organ lasted, but they can last a long time, but sometimes they don't. And you know, the sobering statistics about heart transplant recipients that transplant recipients, only half are alive 11 years after transplant. And that's a really, for parents, for myself as mom, statistic, no one can say that word, that, that I can't hardly swallow, that reality. You know, it's something that you don't want to think about, because the odds have always been stacked against him his entire life. And, you know, with COVID, or any sickness, you know, illness, it could, this, you know, this could be the thing that takes him, because he can't fight it off. And so that's a hard reality to live with day in and day out. And there's a lot of anticipatory grief there, you know, and you try to live in the moment as best you can, I guess. And then there's other unknowns, and unfolding consequences for Gaelen behaviorally. And, you know, I think just my own conjecture about the trauma that he's endured, with being in the hospital for so many months, even as just an infant. But he didn't get to do a lot of those developmental things that babies normally get to do. And then just frequently, you know, people messing with his body, and he doesn't have control over it. So he's had some behavioral stuff, and you know, he's seen psychiatrists and psychologists, and he's a wonderful, beautiful kid, but, you know, he's got some baggage. And so yeah, just a lot of worry and fear, and I think every parent can identify with that, to be sure. So moving on to slide 8 here. Oh, computers. Please don't hate me, but I've got some nursing diagnoses for you. Everybody's favorite. So some that are particularly applicable to this subject, or in Gaelen. You think of risk for infection. So on that picture there, a year or so ago, well, a year and a half now, but he developed periorbital cellulitis in his left, is that left? Yeah, that's left. In his left eye. And it kept coming back, and we couldn't figure out why. And he was in the hospital 5 or 6 times for that, for IV antibiotics. And that's just because, you know, when you're on those heavy-duty medications, you just does wacko stuff, and you suddenly get these odd things popping up. And that was pretty stressful. But he's always at a risk for infection. And then, you know, there's family or caregiver role strain. And I can't remember if there's a diagnosis. I apologize, I need to check about, you know, insufficient resources or financial strain. And even, I mean, I don't think that's a nursing diagnosis. But anyway, that's definitely a relevant issue. And then I think there's one about insufficient knowledge. And so, about his care, and the nurses were a huge part of that. And then going back to the risk for infection, you know, Gaelen, because of his transplant, cannot get live vaccines, because he could actually contract measles or mumps or rubella, or, you know, and so we count on other people getting those vaccines, you know, and that's something we think of for nursing education that we do as nurses, you know, about why vaccines are so important, because there are people who can't get it, and so they depend on other people to get vaccines to keep, you know, people like Gaelen well. So, and there's more nursing diagnoses than that, but I just thought I'd throw in a couple there. And slide 9, let's talk about nurses. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about you guys. Nurses are superheroes. I mean, they carried us through. They kept us going through this entire thing, and they cared for us as a whole family unit. And I hear pediatric nurses talk about, one of the biggest challenges of pediatric nursing isn't taking care of kids, it's taking care of the whole family, because that's exactly what you're doing, and that's exactly what those nurses did for us. And they cared for us holistically. And, I remember nurses, part of the struggle being a mom to a child in the hospital is that there's not anything that you feel you can tangibly do. And so to the best of their ability, they let me do things for Gaelen, and they encouraged me to pump so that Gaelen could have breast milk. And even just, when I was able to change a diaper, they said, you change the diaper, and just little things like that, because it's very, you feel very helpless as a parent when you can't do anything for your own baby. And I remember one nurse, night shift nurse, she was amazing. She offered to, take me to church, like on her time off. And, you got to kind of weigh boundaries as a nurse about whether you would feel comfortable with that. But just the fact that she cared enough to offer that and care about me and my, care about me as mom. And they really advocated for Gaelen and all of us throughout the 3 months that we were in the hospital. I remember one nurse, and Gaelen had a central line throughout the whole time in the ICU, but one of the nurses was advocating for a different size catheter, and she went head toe to toe with the doctor, and she really believed that he needed a different size, and these were the reasons, and I don't remember why, but her passion and her care was, I still remember that to this day. And going into nursing myself, I had no idea the amount of teaching that nurses do. And when Gaelen was in the hospital, well, and even now, it's nurses that teach us how to care for Gaelen and what we need to do. And the last few weeks he was on the floor and we were getting ready to go home. They were the ones teaching us how to draw up meds, how to give them, when to give them, how to care for him, how to take a heart rate. They enabled us to be able to take care of Gaelen the best that we could once we were home. How to use the oxygen, how to do a NG tube feeding, how to use the pump. It was amazing. Those nurses are real life superheroes. And then going to slide 10 now, I just want to touch on kind of the bigger picture of all of this. So, and the term care coordination, or the concept care coordination, I really love second year, where we got to go over care coordination, and it's kind of a nebulous concept, but when you think about somebody like Gaelen, no one person or specialty can provide all the care that Gaelen needs. It's multidisciplinary. We've had, I swear, everybody's helped Gaelen at some point. Nurses from so many different specialties, pediatrics, docs from, his heart transplant docs, ENT, he's had hearing stuff, he's had his, GI stuff, so many different specialties, PT, OT, special education. It's all a coordinated effort, and that concept of care coordination, it takes a village and exquisite communication and collaboration between disciplines, and it's been amazing to watch. It's truly amazing. So I hope that maybe next year when you touch on this topic, you'll think about Gaelen and how it's relevant to our special needs vulnerable populations. And then last slide, the bigger picture in terms of ethics and the ethics of transplant. And, you know, you think about who gets the organ once there's one available, and how do we decide that? And there's some pretty amazing things in place to fairly do that, but still it's a conundrum, you know. And then you think about Gaelen and his life, and we signed him up for this life, and he didn't have a choice, you know. And so every day there's been, you know, we've wondered, did we do the right thing for him? Because this is his cross to bear, if you will. But he didn't have any 2 cents about it. So he's got a lifetime of medicine, of frequent medical procedures, you know, and it's heavy. It's heavy. So, you know, did we make the right call for him? And the societal burden of transplant as well, you know, I think about different theories and utilitarianism and how, you know, that sort of what am I trying to say? It supports the greatest good for the greatest number. And, you know, if you think about transplant, it's Galen's medical bills for those 3 months. I mean, close to $2 million. We have an itemized book, literally a book of the expenses. And so that's a huge burden on society. And, you know, is that the greatest good for the greatest number of people? And you could debate either way, or, you know, is this good because of the research or the things that we learn from it? And it's all very interesting. And then you think about, you know, things like abortion. And, you know, a lot of people would argue that maybe the right choice was for him to not be here. And he almost wasn't. And to kind of backtrack a little bit, there was an option once we knew what the diagnosis was, that they said, you know, if you would like to be induced so that you can meet him while he's still alive, you can do that. And that was an option. And I think when we hear the word abortion, we get all kind of up in arms, and it's a very emotional, triggering word. And yet, no one was ever judgmental about it. You know, they said, if this is what you want to do, so that, and it was so that we could meet him while he was alive, because he wasn't expected to live. So it was either that or he would die in utero, and, you know, we wouldn't get to meet him. So you think about abortion, and when somebody brings that up, just know that there are those of us who have thought of it not as an abortion, but as you know, a way to get to meet someone before they're gone. And it's yeah, and ethics wise, you know, greatest good for the greatest number of people. And if you think about finite resources and utilitarianism, you know, you could argue that transplant is just too great a burden on our tax system, on our healthcare, and that we should spend the money on people who are healthy, who will live. But anyway, I think that all of that is very interesting. So, and that's part of, you know, why I'm sad that I couldn't come in and chat with y'all and get your input too, because it's a very neat subject to talk about, as far as, you know, concepts and theories and ideas, and especially, you know, being nurses in healthcare like you are. So anyway, that's kind of just a few ideas about the bigger picture, but that is Galen's story. And I thank you for your time listening, and, you know, if you have questions, I, you know, invite you to ask, and Lynn can share my email, or, you know, I'd love to kind of talk more. And yeah, thank you so much, and way to go, you guys. guys are awesome. You're going to be spectacular nurses, and you are in the home stretch here. So hang in there, and thanks so much.